I should just send folks to this URL, I guess. Live on this thing. Cool, so that's the thing, and now I can just like get rid of this video while this stupid, so I should delete this tweet. Delete. Day 5, live now. Boom, okay. Cool, so we got that now, and then I'm gonna also modify this. Not the right stream, link in description. Correct stream. Yeah, so that I can delete this later. Alright, awesome. I know there are people in the chat, but okay, yeah, that should do it. Cool, alright, so let's see, what do we got here? Last time we were working on the button group, right, and we kind of did a bunch of ugly things to make it work. I spent some time on figuring out how does this thing, like how do you actually get it to do the right thing. I think I've been able to figure that out. So okay, I can't see the comments thing. Let me, there we go. Can I pull it up here? Okay, I guess I'm gonna stay here. Perfect. So this is kind of the evil things we did last time. So I couldn't really figure out how to add additional styles and this like border radius left thing, right? Because we wanted something like this, and by default style system does not support it. They only support this, right? And which kind of makes sense because it's almost impossible to support everything, right? So I actually created a pull request, and then while doing some research for that pull request, did I create an issue or a pull request? I think I created an issue. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so while I was trying to figure out how many, like, what's the criteria, I realized there are like over 500 properties. There we go. There are 565 distinct properties, so there is no way any API could support them all. Like, you just can't add all of them. It doesn't make sense. And of course, there are new drafts, right? So the new properties coming up in browsers all the time. So something that was there all along but didn't catch my eye was style system supports creation of custom props. So you can create your own props and then you can use them the way you want to. So the API kind of looks like this. You say custom props, and then I have a border left radius. Now this is not actually a CSS property. This is just a prop that I get to invent. And it translates to these two properties. So top left radius and bottom left radius. And then there's right. And then you can also define the scale. So scale is the values we have here. So I define the scale to be radii, which means it will pick up a value from these, which is kind of what we want. Cool. So with that, I was able to get rid of a bunch of things. And yeah, I was just able to do this where I say, these are my styles that I want to override, and border left and border right. And I didn't really have to go ahead and, get something from theme or parse it or anything. This is just the styles that already exist in the button, right? So in token button, this one. So we just read it and reuse it. So that's been perfect. I was thinking about what is the best way to merge these styles, because this is coming from the button group, which is the parent to the button, right? And if you look at the button also has some of its own styles, right? And we don't want them to clash. So I had to put these styles as first and then props as later, so that props will override what we want. And then inside the base element, we kind of pass it to styled from emotion. So it kind of merges the properties and renders the right thing. So it is kind of interesting because you can have 3 layers of styles, right? You can have styles that are actually the component styles, right? Which can come from theme. Actually, there are 4 layers. So the first one is the purest one, which comes from like the tokens, right? This is your theme which you can customize. The second layer is the layer which is already in the component, right? So we wrote some styles over here which are like, you can say component styles which are not themable, but we know it will always exist, so we don't let people theme them because it's like, what's the point? The third layer then becomes things that come from the parents, which will come in props, right? And then what comes from the parents should override the theme, because if you're passing it explicitly, it means you're intentionally doing it. And the fourth one, the last one, is something that comes on the element itself. So I think to show that, let me add some code here. Button group examples. This one, right? JSX. Right. So there could be some properties in the parent. You could also choose to just write some properties here, right? You might want a border radius over here. Like for example, maybe I go with border radius 2, which is like 0. Like I don't want to override it. And then this is also on the props, and button group is also on the props, and they kind of just, there's a collision, right? And one of them wins. And in this case, you can see, I don't know which one wins. Let me put it in the examples. Button group examples. Yeah. Alright, so it does seem like the parent styles wins over the explicit style, which is probably wrong, right? Like I don't think that's a good API, because like in these 4 things I mentioned, this is like inline styles, right? So this should win, and then it should go to the parent, and then the theme, and then lastly the default styles. So there's a bunch going on. And when I write like theming, I probably should like document all of that properly, because all of this can get tricky, right? Like, and the thing you want is the user shouldn't have to think about it. It should always do what feels most obvious, but under the hood, we know that there are priorities and there is an order which it should follow. Okay, so that's going on. There's that one bug that's still left, but today we're gonna do like input and input group, and just to show you what those look like. Input group. So this is what an input group looks like. You can have something on the left, so you can have like a prefix with like an icon thing going on, or you can have a postfix with some text kind of thing. And I think Bootstrap allows you to have anything here, right? Which is kind of perfect, because you can either have text, or you might want to put an actual icon like a search icon. So as long as we keep it composable, we'll be fine. This is interesting. So you can have 2 inputs, you can have multiple inputs, blocks. And let me find out. Yeah, you can have buttons, right? Which is kind of another thing. So there's like a prefix, postfix, and you can kind of have whatever you want in the over there. So that's the input group. To get to input group, we first need inputs, which we don't have yet. So I'm going to start there. Create a new folder with input. So someone asking, which font is that for VS Code? Well, first, this is not VS Code. This is Atom. I don't really use VS Code. The font is called Dank Mono. You can find it on dank.sh. It's by my good friend Philip. There you go, Dank Mono. Go to dank.sh. Input, new file, index.js. That's going to be our component file. Then I'm going to create an examples. where the examples will live, and then finally something to show in the docs. So input dot mdx. Great. I like to start by creating like a empty example. So function input component takes some props, returns an input, I guess, and just forwards all the props. Export default input, right? And now this is not the eventual state, but this is just to get something on the screen. So in our component index, no, source index, where is it? There is an index file where we compile everything together, where we like put everything together. So I'm going to add input and input. There we go. Perfect. So now this should be available in other places, and then I'm going to write a simple example. So function, actually let me copy an example from somewhere else like this. Great. Simple, we have a input here. I'm just going to give it a placeholder of what's your name. Cool, that does it. And finally the mdx. I should probably write like a tiny script which automates this, because I keep doing the same thing. This button example should be input examples. This should be input, and I'm just gonna copy the input example. This is an input. How do you define input? Easily extend. Oh, they don't actually have inputs. Use an input to ask the user for information. Sounds kind of stupid, but yep, that's what it is. Cool. We don't have a first input yet. Input examples is not defined. Cool, I know this error. I have to restart my doc server. Oops. Still compiling. Alright, I guess we'll start writing some more. So, oh, there we go. Okay, so our tiny ugly looking input is here. What we want to do with input is we want to get styled from Reactron utils, right? And then instead of using this input, we'll create an element which is styled. Oh, actually, we don't need to do this, I guess. We can just import the element from Reactron utils, and then use element as an input. Right, so this gives us all the customization that we already have hooked up. And now I also want to create like a theme file for this. So components input.js. I'm going to copy some things from the button because I know a lot of things are common. Yeah, don't need variants. Yeah, this we would want to keep it the same and actually pull this out as well, because if you have an input and a button together, you want them to be of the same size. So that's why I keep them together here. We kind of want a lot of the same styles here. Great. And then I need to export this button input. input. Import it into our elements, input as styles, so that I can pass it down here. Perfect. That should hook up the basic component input. Perfect. So we got this going on. Now what we want is, I'm gonna ignore this for a while and just try to get the default input first. So the default input should be, let's write it here. It should have a font size which inherits, I guess, right? And then it should have a lot of padding. So I'm gonna give like 3 or something. And again, I say this every time, but this comes from this space here, right? It comes from here. Cool. This is crazy big. I'm gonna make it smaller. And actually, I want padding X and I want hard-coded heights, or I should say like fixed heights. So sizes come from here, and I want to take like size maybe 36. Like let's go with 2. Right, and then let me increase the X padding. Okay, so that looks kind of decent. I'm not sure how do I feel about the border width. I guess it's useful to have one, but the border color should be slightly better. So we're gonna go with colors. I want a gray. I don't know which one. Let's go with 6-ish. It should probably be the same as the button. So token button, the default border is 1. Wait, the default button is really light. I don't think we can actually have the same one because they would look kind of weird when you put them side by side. Okay, we can come back to that. Cool, so we have an input. That's kind of all there was probably. Okay, maybe I'm missing something and we will come back to it. But I will quickly jump into input groups because that's more interesting. Source, input group, do all of the shenanigans again that we just did. Index.js. I'm gonna do a bunch of copy paste. Don't care about this. Input group. Okay, that's interesting. What should be the input groups type? Right, it's like this. So I'm gonna go with a div for now. I'm not sure if it's the right thing. We'll figure out. Let's put an examples. Samples.js. Right, and now it gets interesting because we're going to start with input and button side by side. So we're going to try to recreate this one. Whoop. Yeah. Select. Wait, how down did I come? Reactron. Input group from index. Alphabetical. Great, and now we can say put a input group. Right, I'm trying to figure out what the API of this should be. It should probably be, you just put 2 things. So you put an input group, and then you wrap your button input inside it. I guess it should be that simple. Okay, and then finally let's write some docs for this. Input group mdx. I'm gonna close all the tabs. Input .mdx, copy paste, input group combines inputs with metadata or actions. Metadata sounds stupid. Type information, I guess, or actions. Input group examples come from input group. There we go. Okay. Now I'm sure I need to restart this. Where is my server? There we go. Perfect. So while that's happening, I'm gonna also start. I'm gonna look up what should this type be. So we can of course just look over here, find out. Okay, they make it a div tag, which is cool, and they have a prepend. Oh, that's how they style it. That's smart. So there's a prepend part, and there's like the actual input inside it, and I guess this is the append. Okay, interesting. I'm not sure why they need it. I'm guessing it's something to do with like how do you decide the border or how do you overlap them, right? Because this input is, how big is the input? The input stops here, right? Which would happen on its own, so that's easy. Okay, so let's start with the first thing which I can see, which is the border radius, right? We don't want this thing happening, which is like folding in between. And we already did something similar in button group. So we have some. Wait, am I using this? No. Am I using this? No. Okay, so we have something to go off for. And I think I will just copy all of this. This is literally the styles I want. Which also means maybe we should bring it somewhere else. Okay, anywho. There we go. The element renders as a... Oh, we're using a stack there, which is also a good idea. I think stack... What is the default type for the stack? Stack renders... It doesn't say, so we kind of can control it. I guess we can say stack as a div. Perfect. Alright, we do need this styles, which should either come from the input tokens, components, right? Or it should come from the button. Now this is where it becomes very important that they match, they're consistent with each other. Stack is not defined, of course it's not. Import stack from Reactron. Right, because if you have different border radius or different properties, height for button and the input, they're gonna look really weird next to each other, right? Like one of them will just have a bigger border radius than the other. So it's important they have the same. Which also kind of brings me to maybe we should abstract this as well, or maybe we shouldn't. Not sure, but I'm gonna add a comment in the thing here where border radius match button to look good next to each other. Sweet. And I'm gonna write that in button as well because I know I will forget. Match input to look great. Cool, so now that we have this, now I know the styles and how I want to style them. So this definitely looks ugly. I'm gonna change it. I'm gonna go to tokens, input, and the color. Let's actually go with what button does and see, and kind of like start increasing from there. So our default button border is gray 1, in not gray 6, and I'm gonna open the colors on the right just for reference. Pane split right. Yep, these are my grays, and this looks good, but it also is almost not visible, right? So we do want some, should at least be visible, so we're gonna increase it. Yeah, that looks way better. This is an interesting thing where you kind of will see a separation of margin unless they're the exact same color, and these folks don't actually pay too much attention to it because it doesn't have to be the same color. So I guess in our case, what's actually really bad here is this like extra 1 pixel bit, like the input ends and then the button starts, but there's the border of the input. Should we get rid of it? I'm guessing it's like a margin minus trick. Margin minus on the button, I assume. Yep, okay. This thingy. Yeah, there we go. Margin left minus 1 pixels. I guess that's not too bad. So we can also add this, like if it's the last element, then margin left should be minus 1 pixels. This is not something we actually codify because in our space we kind of never really need a negative, right? So I'm gonna create a new one called overlap, which has the value of minus 1, and then make this called overlap. Right, so we kind of know I'm just giving it a name so that it feels less weird. Alright, now the other thing about this is, and this is something I haven't figured out yet, is when you're on this, the focus the outline kind of goes behind the button, which is bad, but it's because how they're laid out, the Z index or the rendering naturally is this is behind and this is up front. But when you're on focus, we want it to come ahead, and this is something that I saw with button group as well, where you see that this is kind of hidden behind, and that's something that Bootstrap folks solve pretty nicely, where you can see the outline, right? And they do it by changing the Z index on focus. So when I do focus, right, you'll see on this input there's gonna be a Z index. There we go, it's a Z index 3, right? And they actually change it based on the focus. So you have input group form control in focus, right? And that's something I haven't figured out. So that's a to do, I guess. Great. Gordon says also, hey, nice to see you again. Color coordinating is super hard. I spent hours yesterday trying to come up with something half decent. So cool that you can breeze through it easily, Sid. I think the key there is to first create a palette, right? And then it doesn't have to be perfect, but it just has to be something you can riff off. And you start there, and then you really don't want to spend a lot of time in hex code land. You really want to spend time in creating a set for yourself and then saying, this is the first one, this is the second one, right? Like you want to talk in terms of grays, right? You want to say gray 2 and gray 1, and then you can kind of start finding patterns where you know that input and button should have matching grays, right? Or compatible grays. Like I don't think these are matching, like these are not the same gray, but they're compatible gray to some level, right? And sometimes I'm not really too sure about this because it's look correct visually, right? Actually, I'm on my big screen which doesn't have great colors. Okay, even on my like MacBook, like the Retina thing also shows like these colors look decently compatible, but you might just want to keep them the same to keep it easy. Okay, anywho, so this is the first input group that I wanted to create. Then the next thing is like you also want it to be on the left, right? So I'm just gonna create like a bunch of them now, and yeah, so input group examples, and then I'm just gonna create this massive thing, all combinations, and then like this render it with like a bunch of them. So I'm gonna drop that and take this combinations. Button group MDX, button group examples dot combinations. Right, I'm not gonna like put the code yet because I just want to see how they look. Is it called combinations? It is called combinations. Sweet. Okay, reload. What? Where am I? Oh, it's not called button group. Where am I? I'm supposed to be working with input groups right now. God damn it. Input group MDX. Yeah, it should be here. I hope I'm editing the right file. Yeah. That's the one. Nothing was returned. Combinations return. Okay. Sweet. So these are the two. You'll also notice how they stick to each other because I don't put any margin on my components because it's kind of, this is the thing that if you're building a reusable component, you should not have margins on the component. You should have like the parent of the component is responsible for deciding the layout. And by adding margins to your components, you're kind of making that job difficult because then you have to keep overriding it. Like a bunch of other things, I guess. I have a blog post on that on my blog, which is sid.st/blog. I think it's called spacing. Yeah, there we go. It's number 18. Spacing for reusable components is hard. And it kind of talks about the various approaches and how where they kind of suffer. So I'm going to give margin bottom to both of these. This is also another thing that it's always easier to follow one pattern, that either only give margin top or margin bottom. Don't give both, because otherwise again you're into the mess of overriding things. Okay, something pretty interesting just happened, which the margin actually didn't apply. So, which means we created a bug over here by not passing down our props. Nice, good smell. So you always want to pass down props as well. Perfect. So now we have this, and this works. Let's do 2 buttons and 2 inputs and a button, right? Okay, I want to make them slightly realistic because these examples are like, where would you even use them? So the first one is easy. It's like enter your email, and it's probably like a subscribe link. So subscribe. This one, on the other hand, is like if it's on the left, then it's probably something you can do. So for example, refresh tokens, and then here is where your token is. I'm gonna it doesn't really need a placeholder. I'm gonna add a default value of like some gibberish here. Right, so this becomes a thing like you click here and then it gives you the token, right? Okay, now let's create one which has multiple. So I have 2 of these, where the first one is gonna be 2 inputs. So I have input, placeholder, let's say username and password, and with the login. And the other one is going to be this one where they have two buttons, right? So it's probably, I'm going to steal this again. It's probably the same where you have like a token, and then you can either say copy the token or you can refresh token. Right, that sounds cool. Cool. So this is cool. The first thing that comes to my mind is, okay, there are a few things happening here. So the first thing that comes to my mind is there is no separation between these, which is stupid. I've actually created buttons which don't have borders because I thought it's a good aesthetic feel, but you can clearly see this is the place where it breaks. So we should probably always have border on our buttons. I'm just gonna bump it one level. Yeah, that's way nicer. Okay. The other thing I see here is if you have multiple elements, you will have this overlap again. And I think the mistake I've done here is that I've only added overlap on the last one. In fact, it should be on all of the elements except the first one, right? So I'm gonna add it to the base so that it's on all of them. Margin left is overlap, and if the index is 0, then I don't want to add. Actually, that's gonna screw up the parents thing, so I probably shouldn't do that either. I should add it in a separate rule, which is if index is not 0, then override style should have this. Right, this is an independent rule. Okay, that looks cool. Yeah, that looks super sweet. Other than like the Z index thing on focus, this looks super sweet. Cool. One thing that looks weird on first sight is that the input group is based on the length of its elements, which means if you have multiple input groups, they're not going to be aligned, right? And because input group is a stack, we can probably add width to the parent. Let's say we add 500 pixels to both of these, the last two. And because it's a stack component, it would stretch itself out. At least I thought it would. So that's something that's interesting to look at, that you might want to control the height, the width of the parent. Oh, it actually did. But none of these take more space. So that's interesting. So this stack element of ours is actually a flex box. It has property flex. But for it to take its space, we want to define the elements, and we want to say these are the elements that can grow. So for example, in our this case, we don't want the buttons to grow on their own, but we want the input to fill up the space. So the other way around, I'm sure works. Like if I give something really like 400 or maybe like 350, it is going to shrink, and then it probably will come from the input, but not the other way around. Like it wouldn't grow on its own. Yeah. Oh, actually, everyone shrinks. That's stupid. Okay, so I'm going to look at flex grow because I have no idea how that works. We kind of want like an auto smarty pants things, which basically grows and eats up. Okay, I clearly don't know what that is. I probably have to learn this. So I know basic flexbox, but flexbox, what the flexbox? There we go. 20 videos. Yep. Wow, there's a bunch of stuff here. Okay, yeah, so I'm gonna watch this later today, and hopefully when I come tomorrow, I'll have an answer. Cool. So, let's continue our button group options. We want to get this one and this one. All right. So we create an input group, and instead of a button this time, we want like a, I don't know what to call this, just like a span, right? So if you have a span with, say, at the rate inside it, and then we have an input, which is like username. What is this even going to do? It's going to align them, but how? It wouldn't really know if this should be like, how does it know how to style it? Should it try to style this? Or should we create like a text thing, right? I think that's slightly better answer if we create like a I'm gonna say input group dot text, right, which is a function, and this function is kind of responsible for rendering I'm gonna say span, I guess, but it's also customizable, so you can give whatever. And actually we're already using flex, so I'm gonna make it a div, and it should have a background which is the same as the button, right? So that makes it easy. We can import, oh god, that looks weird. So we can import button as button styles. That feels icky now. Input styles and button as button styles, right? And then everywhere I use styles, I need input styles. Okay, and then the properties here should be, what did I break? Okay, yeah, the properties here should be that it should have a background. So I'm gonna say background. This is feeling weird. Let's go with this for a while. Background should be the same as button styles dot I don't really want to say go use the default background color, right? I would rather have it hard coded, and then it kind of becomes like you have to match it, right? So it should be background is gray 1, and then the border color, you also need a border. So a border is 1 pixel solid, right? And then border color is this. I can actually take from the input, I guess, because we already have that here. Token input border colors. So this should be styles dot border color, right? And now in our examples, instead of using a span, we can use input group dot text, and we know that we're fetching a compatible thing, like a thing that would work inside the input group. Change this back to styles. this is where it becomes like kind of really important-ish to match the border and the background, right? So that we can actually, instead of doing something silly like gray, whatever, we can just use all of this. Okay, I'm actually gonna go for it and just gonna hunch and say, yeah, reuse all the styles from the input, right? Like just use all of it. And it's gonna give us something like this, right? Which is cool. Because it has like the right size and everything, it just doesn't have the right background or alignment. And to get the background, I can override this and say use the input border color as the background, right? So that it's same. And that's probably gonna look hideous. Sorry, styles.border color. Okay, it doesn't look too bad is what I want to say. Kind of looks the same as what the others look like. The alignment is all whack, which we should change. And so instead of an element, we can actually just use a stack again, which we imported earlier. And stack, because it's a flex box with all the alignment rules like left and top and what do you call it, justify and align, it will make it look perfect. Cool, so this is nice. The only thing I don't like is or maybe we should create a new rule here, right? So I'm gonna say maybe we should create input group over here. And input group can have its, like input group is the place where we should define the size of this. Or maybe not. Okay, so for now I'm gonna override it here and say padding X should be 2 and not 3 so that it's smaller. But other than that, I'm kind of happy with where this is. Right, because the key thing that I want to go for is when you change your input styles, token input, right? When you're customizing your input, right? For example, you decide your border should be green, right? Which I really like. I actually want to do that. It should also take care of this, right? Like this should become on theme. Oh my god, that green is hideous. 5. Yeah, right? Like I want it to match, right? I don't want it to be a boring gray. Although I would like to have some customization so that I can change this color. But yeah, I guess that's left for the user to theme and not, like, we can't make all the decisions here. Cool, so that is cool. We got this. I'm also going to do like a postpend. What is a good postpend? Yeah, email is perfect. Input group, margin bottom, just flip the 2. This should be at email.com. That looks silly. At example, I don't know, I'm just gonna make it gmail.com, and this probably is the same, so meh. Yep, and it comes later. Yes, this is fairly standard now. Looks pretty simple. I should probably differentiate between the button and the tag. Let's see if these people actually do it, because it seems important, right? Like you have this, which is not a button, and it has, I want to see what's the background here of this append. Okay, it's this E9 EF thing. And then when you go to buttons, Oh, they use secondary buttons so that it doesn't look like they're basically the same thing, right? Like, otherwise it's really difficult to distinguish. The only distinguish is like which one of them has hover styles and which one of them doesn't, which seems like a terrible thing. So to use the secondary is kind of a user option. It's what you put here, right? Like if you want to use appearance secondary, that's kind of a you thing, right? Like that's a choice you make, right? And we can't really force that choice. So the only thing I guess we can do is make sure that our default styles don't clash too much. So, and that's just to like set a good example. Of course, the user can decide to make them clash exactly the same way. So our button default background has a gray 1. We can either choose to do something like this where we don't have those and we just have, like, we don't have a background and we just have this, right? Although this will end up looking like a, what do you call it, a input field now. So I want like the slightest thing, but I don't want the input color, I guess. I want something like a grays. This is tricky because we're already on 1. I think what we should really play around with is the color here, right? If it's a lighter shade of gray than the base text, that really makes a difference here, right? Like that, this basically says that this is not a button. Do not click it. It's not an input. There's something else. I really like this more. I think what would really do the trick is if we give it a font sizes. The base is 2, so I'm going to go with something smaller like 1 here. And then it's like a very different visual treatment itself, right? Like this. And you know that this is not the same. This is like a different field, right? So again, all of this we should just extract it into the styles for input group so that we can import it and put it as the label or the prepend or something. Text is the word. Okay, that's what I'm gonna stop. This all looks pretty cool because it's coming together now, and I want to get into creating forms, because with forms you do all of this, plus you also have to take care of like labels and alignments and like accessibility, so that's fun. Wait a second. Oh, okay. I have a question which is, your arm stand mic holder looks cool. May I know what do you use and what does it cost? Okay, I have no idea what this is called. I ordered it from Amazon. I'm just gonna drop. I'll put a link in the video description, I guess, or actually it's better if you like tweet at me so that I can just reply. I'll have to go through my Amazon history to find it. So yeah, tweet at me. I'll hook you up. Okay, I'm gonna stop here and see you all folks tomorrow. Tomorrow's a Saturday, so maybe see you tomorrow, maybe see you on Monday. I'm not sure. Maybe see you tomorrow. I don't have a lot going on, so I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.